In the summer of 1793, as revolutionary fervor gripped France and Europe trembled with change, an extraordinary diplomatic mission was quietly making its way across the vast expanse of China. Led by Lord George Macartney, this British embassy would become one of history's most consequential diplomatic encounters, a collision between two world powers that would reshape the course of global history. The year 1793 marked a pivotal moment in world history. In the West, the French Revolution was entering its most radical phase. King Louis XVI had been executed just months earlier, and European monarchies watched in terror as revolutionary ideals spread across the continent. But far across the seas, in the Middle Kingdom of China, the Qing dynasty under Emperor Qianlong presided over what many considered the world's most prosperous and powerful empire. For over a century, China had maintained strict control over foreign trade, confining European merchants to a single port, Canton. Emperor Qianlong ruled over perhaps 300 million people, nearly one-third of the world's population at the time. In his view, China was the center of civilization, the Middle Kingdom around which all other nations revolved as tributary states. For British merchants, this system was increasingly frustrating. The East India Company, which held a monopoly on British trade with China, chafed under Chinese restrictions. They could only trade through Chinese intermediaries, were confined to a small section of Canton, and faced numerous regulations and fees. Enter George Macartney, 1st Earl Macartney, diplomat, colonial administrator, and now Britain's chosen ambassador to open China to expanded trade. At 56, Macartney had served as governor of Grenada and Madras, earning a reputation as a skilled negotiator and keen observer of foreign cultures. On September 26, 1792, Lord Macartney set sail from Portsmouth aboard HMS Lion, accompanied by the supply ship Hindostan. The mission represented the height of British ambition and technological prowess. The British spared no expense. They brought gifts worth £15,000, a fortune at the time, including clocks, telescopes, scientific instruments, and even a hot air balloon. These weren't just gifts. They were demonstrations of British technological superiority. The journey to China took nearly a year, with stops in Madeira, Rio de Janeiro, and the Cape of Good Hope. Macartney used this time to study Chinese culture and language, preparing for what he knew would be a delicate diplomatic dance. Macartney's private journal reveals his meticulous preparation and growing understanding of the challenges ahead. He wrote, "The Chinese are a people so different from us in everything, language, manners, customs, and religion, that it requires no common degree of skill to manage them successfully." In June 1793, the British embassy arrived in Macau, the Portuguese trading post at the mouth of the Pearl River. Here, Macartney received his first taste of Chinese diplomatic protocol and the first signs of the conflicts to come. The Chinese had very specific ideas about how foreign embassies should behave. They expected tribute missions, acknowledgement of Chinese superiority, and the emperor's supreme authority. Macartney, however, came as the representative of a sovereign king, expecting treatment as an equal. From Canton, the embassy traveled north via the Grand Canal, that marvel of Chinese engineering that connected the fertile south with the imperial capital. For Macartney and his companions, this journey was a revelation, their first glimpse of China's true scale and sophistication. Macartney's party included skilled artists and scientists who documented everything they saw. Their drawings and journals provide us with an invaluable European perspective on Qing China at its height. What struck the British most was the sheer organization of it all. The Chinese government managed the embassy's journey with military precision, every stop planned, every meal prepared, every detail choreographed. It was both impressive and slightly unnerving. At Tianjin, the embassy transferred to the Baihe River for the final approach to Beijing. Here, the tension over diplomatic protocol reached its first crisis point. The Chinese officials informed Macartney that he would be expected to perform the kowtow, the traditional prostration involving 3 kneelings and 9 head touches to the ground when meeting the emperor. For Macartney, this was unthinkable. The kowtow wasn't just a ceremony, it was a political statement. It acknowledged the emperor's supremacy and, by extension, China's superiority over Britain. Macartney couldn't accept this without undermining his entire mission. Macartney proposed a compromise. He would bow to the emperor in the same manner he would bow to King George III on one knee. The Chinese officials were appalled, but after days of tense negotiations, they agreed to present this proposal to the emperor. In early September 1793, the embassy arrived at Jihol, the emperor's summer palace. Here, amidst gardens and pavilions that rivaled Versailles, Lord Macartney would finally meet the most powerful ruler on earth. The palace complex at Jihol was a masterpiece of Chinese garden design, covering over 5,000 acres. For the emperor, it represented the harmony between heaven and earth, between the natural and the imperial. On September 14, 1793, at 6 a.m., Lord Macartney was received by Emperor Qianlong. The 83-year-old emperor, despite his age, cut an imposing figure in his dragon robes, surrounded by the elaborate ceremony of the imperial court. The audience lasted less than an hour. Macartney presented his credentials and gifts, but the emperor's response was polite yet distant. No mention was made of Macartney's requests for expanded trade or diplomatic relations. From the Chinese perspective, this was a successful tribute mission. A distant barbarian kingdom had acknowledged Chinese superiority by sending gifts to the emperor. The specific content of British requests was largely irrelevant. Emperor Qianlong's formal response to King George III would become one of the most famous diplomatic documents in history, a masterpiece of polite rejection that revealed the vast gulf between Eastern and Western worldviews. The emperor's letter is fascinating for what it reveals about Chinese thinking. He acknowledges British technological achievements but dismisses them as unnecessary curiosities. China, he argues, has everything it needs. The British gifts, clocks, telescopes, scientific instruments, were politely received but largely ignored. Chinese craftsmen were ordered to study them, but they were seen as interesting novelties rather than evidence of superior technology. Macartney's private journal reveals his growing frustration and his prescient understanding of the challenges ahead. He wrote, "The Empire of China is an old, crazy, first-rate man of war which a fortunate succession of able and vigilant officers has contrived to keep afloat. But whenever an insufficient man happens to have the command upon deck, adieu to the discipline and safety of the ship." The embassy's departure from Beijing was as carefully choreographed as its arrival. The Chinese had successfully managed the entire visit, maintaining their diplomatic protocols while avoiding any commitments to British demands. Rather than returning via the Grand Canal, the Chinese insisted the embassy travel south through the interior, providing Macartney with a unique glimpse of Chinese society beyond the carefully managed official encounters. This journey revealed the complexity of Chinese society. Macartney observed both the sophistication of Chinese agriculture and administration, and the signs of strain in a vast empire struggling to maintain control over its enormous population. Macartney's observations were remarkably acute. He saw the efficiency of Chinese government but also its limitations. His prediction that China would eventually be forced to engage with the outside world proved prophetic. The embassy departed from Canton in March 1794, having achieved none of its primary objectives. No new trade agreements, no diplomatic relations, no reduced restrictions on British merchants. Macartney's return to London in September 1794 was met with mixed reactions. While the embassy had failed to achieve its diplomatic goals, it had succeeded in providing unprecedented insights into Chinese society and government. In Parliament, debates raged over the mission's significance. Some saw it as a costly failure, while others argued it had laid the groundwork for future relations with China. The official account of the embassy, published in 1797, became a bestseller. European readers were fascinated by the detailed descriptions of Chinese society, technology, and government. The Macartney Embassy created the first comprehensive European understanding of China. Previous knowledge had been fragmentary, based on traders' accounts and missionary reports. Macartney's embassy provided a systematic view of Chinese civilization. From the Chinese perspective, the embassy was quickly forgotten. It was simply another tribute mission from a distant barbarian kingdom, successfully managed according to established protocols. The Chinese inability to understand the significance of the British mission reflected their worldview. They couldn't conceive of a world where China wasn't the center of civilization, where other nations might be equals rather than tributaries. The failure of the Macartney embassy set the stage for the conflicts that would follow. Unable to achieve their goals through diplomacy, the British would eventually turn to force. Less than 50 years after Macartney's polite reception at Jihol, British warships would force China to sign the Treaty of Nanking, opening Chinese ports to foreign trade and beginning China's century of humiliation. The Opium Wars were, in many ways, the violent resolution of the issues Macartney had tried to address diplomatically. The Chinese refusal to engage with the outside world as equals ultimately led to their subjugation by superior military technology. Lord Macartney and Emperor Qianlong never met again after their brief encounter at Jihol. Macartney died in 1806, having lived to see the beginnings of the conflicts his mission had failed to prevent. Emperor Qianlong had died in 1799, still believing in the superiority of Chinese civilization. Their encounter serves as a reminder of the importance of cultural understanding in international relations. When two worldviews collide, the failure to find common ground can have consequences that echo through the centuries. The Macartney embassy was a missed opportunity, a chance for two great civilizations to engage as equals and perhaps avoid the conflicts that followed. Instead, it became a symbol of the challenges that arise when different cultures encounter each other without the will or ability to bridge their differences. In the end, the Macartney embassy stands as one of history's great what-ifs. What if Emperor Qianlong had accepted Macartney's proposals? What if China had opened its doors to the world in 1793 rather than being forced to do so 50 years later? The questions remain, but the lessons of that fateful encounter continue to resonate in our interconnected world.
Thanks for watching.